Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello. So, welcome back to the podcast. This is Addie, and today we have a really interesting interview coming your way with my friend Peggy Burt, who's going to teach us all about the practice of walking meditation in a labyrinth. It's a meditative practice that she discovered within the Christian tradition, and it has even older historical roots and parallels with other walking meditations and spiritual spiraling path structures throughout the world. So it's a really, really rich practice with a lot of different cultural influences and interpretations. So if you are interested after hearing this in practicing more with Peggy, I also wanted to mention that she's one of the guest teachers in the Move to Meditate class library. So we do have a few videos with her there at movedtomeditate.com. And at the end of the episode, she'll also share info about her local in-person classes and labyrinth trips and things that are going on right now. And then also at the end, Peggy mentions a labyrinth locator online, which is really cool. It's where you can type in your zip code and find places to go walk a labyrinth. And if you've never walked a labyrinth, I think by the end of this conversation, you're going to really want to. And I went on there on the Labyrinth locator and searched for my zip code, and I was really surprised how many different labyrinths I found in my area. And even one that's like right around the corner from me that looks like a really beautiful medieval style labyrinth at a church, and it's outside and it's public. So cool. A lot of them are out at hospitals or churches or sometimes in parks. Sometimes they're in private residences, but a lot of them are open to the public and free to use. So you're going to get inspired by Peggy. I'm almost sure of that as you hear her describe the labyrinth practice in this episode. So I encourage you to hop onto that website and find yourself a place to experience this form of walking meditation. So you can check the show notes on my website for the link to that labyrinth locator, and I'm also hoping to get out to that one labyrinth that's around the corner from me sometime this week if the weather cooperates. So check out my Instagram and I'll post some pictures when I do get there. So looking forward to that. And without further ado, let's hear this conversation. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited today because I have with me a dear friend, Peggy Burt. And we have a long history together, so this should be a really fun conversation. We're going to try to mostly focus it on the topic of labyrinth walking meditation, although there are probably a lot of rabbit holes we could find ourselves going down. And the reason why is like Peggy and I met, I don't know how many, several years ago, when she was my boss at a nonprofit arts foundation, and she had hired me to work there part-time while I was developing my yoga teaching career. And so we really became friends working there together, and she was also a yogi, and we ended up starting Spiral Path Yoga Center together. So I talked about this actually last week on our podcast. I interviewed Mike and we talked about you a little bit, Peggy, because it's part of our background. But even after Peggy left the role of being my partner at the studio, she stayed on in the community as a really important person in the Spiral Path world. And she was one of our most beloved teachers at the studio there. And I want to mention about the labyrinth that the spiral kind of shape of the labyrinth is one of the reasons we chose the name Spiral Path Yoga Center in the first place. So it's a really rich symbolism, and there's a lot going on with labyrinth walking meditation. If you're not familiar, you will be after this. So I want to get Peggy's voice in here. Let Peggy say hello, and why don't you go ahead and tell us whatever you'd like to about your background and your yoga and your practice.
Thank you so much, Addie. I am just delighted to be here this morning. To be with one of my favorite people talking about one of my favorite topics is a great way to spend this morning. I am a yoga teacher, but I was a dancer my whole life. I started dancing when I was 4 years old, and I was a mover, and I was one of those young girls that my mother didn't know what to do with me, so she took me to dance class. And I thrived in that environment, continuing on through university and then a professional dance career, teaching, choreographing, performing all over the country. And I had a very long career because I always danced part-time. And then I also had a day job or did something else during the day. And that did a couple of things. One was that I always felt secure in my ability to make a living. And the other thing is I reduced the wear and tear on my body. So I was able to dance without injuries all those many years. And I'm coming to really appreciate that in the stage of my life, because now I get to do yoga and my body is still available to me. And I love doing yoga asana. I also love to do yoga nidra, which is a guided meditative journey of yoga. And through the honor of doing yoga teacher training with Addie over these years, I've really leaned into mantra. I now play the harmonium and do chanting on a regular basis. Learned a lot more about mudra, all the yoga philosophy pieces around the chakras. And all of this informs my journey of both yoga and the labyrinth. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today. But I realized that this balance for me of moving and stillness is really what I strive for every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, walking meditation has always been a profound way of moving into stillness.
Yeah, I think that's a big theme on the podcast here in general, is like that relationship between mindful movement and stillness and how the two can support and inform each other. And just also like hearing your background, which I knew already, but you're such a multi-passionate person. You're the definition of a multi-passionate person. Even within under the umbrella of yoga, like you have so many things that you have really gone deep into and really studied, and you have such a vibrant practice. I think it's awesome.
Thank you, Addie. Well, what I always say, and my teacher, Tracy Stanley, always says, is the practice is the teacher. And I love that because I realize that I constantly am learning more and going deeper and evolving in my understanding through the practices,
I
just
love that.
doing the work.
I love that. The practice is the teacher. Brilliant. That's so true. It's so true. We get in trouble when we think someone else is the teacher.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Um, when in your history did you discover labyrinth walking meditation? And we'll talk more about kind of what it is, but like how did you find out about this particular form of practice?
I was visiting my mother back in Michigan. Although I've lived in California now for over 20 years, I was born and raised in Michigan. And we were back there for a visit during the Easter time. And there was a small Protestant church on the corner. And that's important to know because my family's all very Catholic. So my mother's taking me to a Protestant church.
Whoa.
Yes, thank you. And there was laid a canvas labyrinth, a beautiful 11 circuit Chartres style labyrinth with candles all around it in a dedicated room. And the moment I stepped onto that labyrinth, I had this experience of going home in a
Mm.
way that I'd never experienced before. It was like I'd been waiting for this my whole life. I had always wanted the experience of moving into a meditative stillness, but my mind was too busy, my body was too active. And walking that labyrinth, this is in the late 90s, with my sister, my younger sister Char, and my mother, was one of the most profound experiences of my spiritual life,
Wow.
because I just felt this sense of the turning, coming into the center, the threefold path that I later learned was release, receive, return. And it was like all at once, it was imprinted in my body, or it became a memory that was alive within me.
Mm.
And I realized that this was going to be part of my life's work. It was like instant. It was like a lightning bolt moment. And I
Wow.
can't say I've had that really about anything else in my life. So it's quite profound for me. And at one moment, we were, as people that have walked the labyrinth before know, that there's a single path that you follow in, and then you take that same path on the way out, and you pass other people.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I was walking in one direction, and my sister and my mother were coming the other direction. And I just felt their energy brushing me on either side. And I heard this beautiful phrase, which is, "We are angels to each other."
Oh.
And I'd never thought of that before. The labyrinth often speaks to me in very poetic ways that I'm like, oh, that's a good one. And this feathering, this feeling of this brushing of the energy, and that we're all on this path for a reason together. We
Mm.
may be going in one direction, they may be going in another direction, but that we're all on this path, and we can learn and grow by being in community with each other. So that was a profound moment for me, and it spurred me to find out more about labyrinths and to go study with Lauren Chartres at Grace Cathedral in the Labyrinth facilitator training in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing that you had such an instant, powerful experience with it. And just for people who maybe never seen the shape of a labyrinth, can you kind of describe, like, you started to a little bit, but like what the shape of it is like and what it looks like and what we're kind of talking about with walking through
Absolutely.
it?
Thank you. I know I gave you an experience of it, and now I'll tell you what it's about.
Yeah. Well, people might know, but just in case.
So the labyrinth that I experienced that evening, and the labyrinth that I have myself, my own labyrinth, is based on the Notre Dame de Chartres, which is a beautiful cathedral, Our Lady of Chartres, that's outside of Paris, about 50 miles outside of Paris. And that particular labyrinth is a beautiful, spiraling, circular shape. And it is in the floor. It's in the stone. It's made of limestone at Chartres. And it is a journey of pilgrimage. So
Mm.
the medieval cathedrals in Europe were seen as pilgrimage centers. And in about the 13th century, these labyrinths were laid down in the cathedral floors to serve as a metaphor of the journey of life. It was also a metaphor for Christ's death and resurrection in the
Mm.
Christian tradition. And it was also a way for pilgrims to make a journey when it was too dangerous to go to Jerusalem because of the Crusades.
Oh,
So there are
wow.
lots and lots of layers of why the labyrinth was there in the floor of the Chartres Cathedral, but we know that it was based on ancient tradition. So labyrinths have existed as spiraling paths in many ancient traditions, in the Druids and the Celts and the Norse, and
Hmm.
many labyrinths are found in the Italian countryside.
And the
And
word
all
is
of these,
Greek, right? It goes back to like ancient Greece, at least the terminology.
exactly. So the mythology of the labyrinth is from Crete, and that there was a terrible monster, the Minotaur, that was being imprisoned inside of a labyrinth by the king. And then somehow Ariadne, the beautiful princess, got trapped inside. And Theseus, the hero in the Greek mythology, went in to save Ariadne and slay the Minotaur that was at the center of the labyrinth. And so it's a hero's journey. And the way that mythology shows up is that there was a golden thread that led Ariadne back out of the labyrinth. The way it shows up in current Labyrinth is that there are what's called a double-headed axe is a labyrs. And you will see that at all four corners of the labyrinth. There is an equal armed cross in the center of the labyrinth. And that can be interpreted in multiple ways. The four directions, as were honored by all the native peoples. The four elements of earth, air, wind, and earth, fire, water.
Wind.
Wait a minute. Thank you. Air. Oh my gosh. Can she name her elements this morning? I hope so.
Well, sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 5, depending.
I know, right?
Chinese medicine has 5.
And so does the yoga tradition, of course.
Right, in Ayurveda, right? Ether.
Right.
Yes.
So what
Earth,
I'm
wind,
what I'm
fire, water, right?
Thank you. I teach this with hands all the time. So what I'm stumbling over is that there's layers and layers and layers of interpretive meaning on the labyrinth.
Different cultural perspectives too, and interpretations.
I think every single interpretation comes right back to spiritual seeking. And that is the basis. That is, why are we here? What is the purpose of our life? What is our journey of life? What are we meant to accomplish? And how can we do that with skillfulness and ease? And when you break it down to that layer, then it gets like, oh, okay, now I can understand all of it.
It's very universal.
It's completely universal. And what I love about it is the labyrinth that we use, the Chartres Cathedral Labyrinth, is called a left-handed labyrinth. And so again, from the yoga tradition, we know that the left-hand side is the lunar side, or the sacred feminine side. And when you turn to the left on the first turn, you go into quadrants. Rather than going into a vortex or a spiral that goes all the way around, you go into quadrants. And those are significant of the seasons of the year and also the seasons of your life. So as you're born and as you mature and as you come into your fullness and your wisdom, and then as you age and ultimately the cycle of life, we die. So it's this, again, profound universal symbol of the journey of life. So we don't go straight to the center. We wind around in these different periods of our life, accumulating wisdom and insight and understanding. And then we shoot to the next quadrant and we go through that. The same number of turns to the left as the right creates harmony in the brain through the right and left brain, so that by the time we get to the center, we feel as though we've been rocked in Mother Earth's arms. We're lulled in a way because we're turning to one side and then we're turning to the other. Just as we instinctively rock a baby, just as instinctively an old person might sit in a rocking chair. And even sometimes in meditation, we rock. It's a very soothing premise for the brain to be held and supported and protected in that way. So we go all the way through these very spiraling pathways that are much like the spirals in our own body. We know that our intestines spiral around inside of our ear. We have spirals inside of our brain. We have spirals. So it's this idea of going into ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper into the reflection of our own lived experience. And then triumphantly, we arrive in the center. And in the Chartres labyrinth, it's a rosette or a lotus. It's said that it was the Eastern symbol was adopted of the 1,000-petaled lotus, which is, of course, our crown chakra. So there we arrive in the ultimate wisdom and openness and receptivity. There are 6 lobes in the Chartres Cathedral labyrinth, and they signify mineral or rock. The second one is plants and foliage. The third one is animal kingdom. The fourth is human. And then the fifth and sixth are either angelic and divine, or I've often heard divine and unknowable, the mystery of the great beyond.
Is that from the Christian tradition influence in it?
It is from the 6 days of creation of God's rights. And then the 7th day, God rested. So, and also the rosette is considered to be the sacred feminine of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and considered the rose of Sharon is often a term used for Mary in the Christian tradition. So there's, again, these layers and layers and layers, but I love to think about the center as being the crown chakra.
Mm-hmm.
And in my labyrinth is called a petite charte. Instead of 11 circles, 11 circuits, it has 7. And so the crown is in the center, and then you can think of each of the circuits going outward as being one of the chakras, with the most wide and open circuit being the earth or the root. And then we have the water, and then we have the fire, and then we have the air, the expression, and then the intuition. So one of the things that is really a practice of labyrinth listening is listening to our deep intuition. And often our mind feels still when we're walking the labyrinth, but there's messaging.
Mm-hmm.
People walk in sometimes with a question or something that they want to have revealed.
Yeah.
So
totally.
The labyrinth can be quite a communicator.
I love that. And just like as you were describing the shape of it, and it's kind of like these layers of path that are stacked up next to each other, but they're winding and eventually leading you to the center. It's like, in my experience of doing it, it's really an interesting feeling, because sometimes you think you know where you are, but then you kind of don't. And it's like the twists and turns are taking you somewhere, and you can't quite see in a straightforward way where that path is leading, and you'll think, oh, I'm almost to the center, and then you find yourself way back on the outside of the circle, and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? And it's just such an interesting metaphor for, what it's like to walk our path, and how we kind of want to control it, and we want to know where we are, but we don't always. But we can start to maybe trust that the path is leading us to the center. One of the things that I always remember you saying about the labyrinth is that it's not a maze. We go in there not to get lost, but to find ourselves.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, you remember a lot. Well, and also the experience of walking it is different every single time. You think you're figuring it out. A labyrinth that I walk frequently is the labyrinth at Forest Lawn in Glendale. It's an outdoor labyrinth, 11 circuit charte labyrinth.
It's at this huge cemetery in Glendale.
And I don't love cemeteries. That's not my first choice of place to hang out, but it is.
You're not that spooky.
Profound and beautiful environment. And I was sitting on the bench one day after I had walked, and just sitting there in a meditative stillness. And a man walked up and he said, "I'm an engineer. I want to know how this thing works before I walk on it."
And you're married to a scientist, so
exactly,
you're probably the right translator for this person.
And it's this rational mind that tries to control, understand, unpack. And the labyrinth sort of laughs at that, giggles at that a little bit in kind of a wonderful way, and really asks us to trust the path. Just as we're asked on a daily basis to trust the path of our life unfolding in front of us, even though we don't know where we're going or how long we have. And so all I could say to that engineer that day was, "Trust the path, she will lead you." And he was like, "Okay." And he did. He walked it. And then afterwards I said, "How was that for you?" He said, "My mind is blown."
Really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
I think he had a similar experience to what you were just describing, Addie, is he thought he could figure out where he was going to turn next. And then the labyrinth would surprise him. And then he found himself at the center, and he's like, "How did I get here?" Yeah. So thank you for describing that, because it's a very universal experience. For me, before I studied with you, I had a very hard time sitting still in meditation because I'm such a mover. And the labyrinth really gave me permission to move and yet to be in a place of great stillness and grace.
Yeah. So was it the first form of meditation that you practiced?
It was absolutely 100%. I had tried. I had every book on the shelf, how to meditate, how to still your mind. And I'm like, yeah, it's not really working out for me. And I love walking in nature, but it felt sometimes in nature, it felt a bit like wandering. What Lauren Chartres always says is the The labyrinth turns your wandering into a purposeful journey. And
Oh.
that to me is very profound, because I'll often have people say, well, can I just walk around, a tree? Can I just walk in nature? I said, you can. And certainly the practice that I learned from you, Addie, about walking meditation in a very, very purposeful, intentional way is a profound, profound practice, which I now have lots of different ways that I meditate. But the labyrinth was my portal. It was
Mm-hmm.
my gateway to being able to trust myself, and that I could go into a place of feeling held and protected, of doing less, of feeling more open and more receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And then other ways of meditating have become available to me now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I would have gotten there if I hadn't had the journey of the labyrinth, because it felt so personal, like it had been designed just for me. And I love that, because it feels very sacred. When I was born, my mother, as I said, was a devout Catholic, very devout Catholic, and she consecrated me to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I wore nothing but blue for the first 7 years of my life.
Really?
And at the time, I'm like, okay, I like blue. And I see these pictures of me with my 4 siblings. There are 5 of us, of course. And they're all wearing whatever. I'm in blue. I'm in blue for 7 years. I'm in blue. And I never questioned it, because my mother said, this is what you're wearing today, or whatever. And over the years, I've realized that the sacred feminine and Mary, and the understanding of the divinity of the feminine, the eternal feminine, is a huge part of my life. And so the labyrinth is yet again a symbol of the sacred feminine, and it's surrounded by lunations, which are the symbols of the moon.
Mm.
And in the 4 quadrants are 28.5 lunations. So it's showing the moon cycle 4 times in the labyrinth. So on the outside edge, it's surrounded by the moon, and reminds us of the nature of femininity, of the cycle, of the moon's
Mm-hmm.
waxing and waning, and that everything is in its proper harmony.
There's
So I
so
love
many
that.
symbols in it of life cycles and journeys, and I want to go back to what you were saying too about sort of starting your practice with labyrinth. And um, I think what you were kind of alluding to is like the pathway of the labyrinth gives you a bit of a structure. And
Yeah.
that's what, the kind of walking meditation I do is much simpler. From the Buddhist tradition, it's like just pick a lane and walk up and down it. It's very simple, but that gives you structure as well. So it's not wandering, right? Because we
Exactly.
can we can mindfully walk in many ways, but we need some container and some structure. And the labyrinth, I think, gives you that container and structure, and it has a beginning and an end, and it takes you on a journey. But it's also really rich with metaphors and symbols that I think are really evocative, and that kind of bring different things forward in your mind, consciously or
Mhm.
subconsciously. And it's a really interesting practice.
I love that you characterize that as the structural support, because I remember when we were first doing the walking meditation in studio or outside, just knowing that you have this lane that you go, and then you're turning, 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 and then you're coming back. It felt to me like it had that same sort of symmetry
Hmm.
that I feel in the labyrinth, which is the journey and the turn, the journey and the turn. And it does feel this very intentional and purposeful protection, because you have that container and you're not worried about other factors. It's like I feel like the whole world just kind of becomes quieter and falls away. The other day in teaching yoga class, I had a brand new student, first yoga class he'd ever taken in his life, which I always love that,
It's
right?
exciting.
And he said, this is the first time I've been able to step away from my work problems in 2 years.
Oh, that's major.
All of these practices that bring us to center, walking meditation, walking the labyrinth, doing our yoga practices, doing our breath practices and our meditation, is that we come to that true nature, that true essence, that doesn't have the fluctuations of the mind and the worries and the anxieties and the task lists and the gotta and shoulds and to do. And it's such a relief to
Totally.
have a regular practice that you can return to again and again and again, because you know when the world becomes too loud, too noisy, too much chaos, when we feel like the best we can do is send loving kindness to people in the world that are in conflict, we realize that our practices are a benefit to others. So every time I step on the labyrinth or walk in meditation, I hope that it will be of a benefit to myself and a benefit to others by raising the vibration and bringing this loving kindness out. So I also feel like the labyrinth is a practice of metta. And I always feel when I'm sitting in the center of the labyrinth that it's that radiation of loving kindness to myself and loving kindness out, that the rings of the labyrinth are like those ripples in the pond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to pick up on what you were saying about, the man that came to your class and he was like, oh, that was the first time I stopped thinking about my work problems a little bit, and your early experiences of feeling like your mind was too busy and your body was too restless to meditate. And I think this is one of the gifts of any kind of walking meditation, is that it's an embodied practice. And when we can get into our body, we can get out of our head a little bit. So I think it's really valuable for that. And um, I'm curious, when did you start in this journey of, you were doing the labyrinth meditation? Were you already doing yoga, or was that later? Like,
Oh,
how did
no,
those
no.
things fit
Yeah,
together?
much, much later. Thank you for asking. And thank you for naming that embodied experience, because I think sometimes we we're so in our head and we think we can figure everything out if we just think hard enough about it.
I've
And
never done that.
oh my goodness. I mean, I constantly am caught up by this, and it's like, get out of your own way. Get out of the way of that thinking mind, that, the memories that come in, the planning that comes in, the ego that comes in, and all of the resentments and all of the stuff that's just like vying for our attention. And it's almost like you just smooth out the water and you really feel like you can drop into the body and the body's wisdom. And it's been very profound for me, because when I was walking the labyrinth initially, I was very much in my dance career, and it felt like I had full capability and capacity in my body, and I was, vigorous, and I was active. As my body has aged, and yes, it has, over these last 25 years.
They tend to do
Um,
that.
oh my
Mine
goodness, have
too.
they? Wow. I Rather than feeling like I was losing something, because usually at the end of your dance career you feel very sad that you're losing the ability to jump, to turn, to
Mm.
do all of the big, movements that we do. And the labyrinth, interestingly enough, was a bridge for me to yoga, because I could do less and still be in my body.
Mm.
I could simply walk and flow from turn to turn, and it was a different kind of dance. And it was a dance that didn't require technique or particular hours of practice every day. It was an embodied practice.
Mm.
I started yoga not until I was really done with my dance career. So it was when I first moved here to California in the early, like 2001, 2002, in that area, that I started practicing yoga, and a very vigorous yoga it was, powerful yoga. And it was really a transition for me. One of my friends, very good friend, Melissa, in the dance company said, I was starting to have trouble with my knees and my hips and my lower back, and I had aches and pains and all of this stuff. And she said, you really ought to try yoga. It might put you back together again.
Mm.
And I'll never forget that, because not only did it put me back together again, it launched me into a whole nother way of being in dialogue with my body,
Mhm.
listening to my body. For many years, I was I pushed myself. I just really pushed myself to leap higher, to turn more, to move faster, to keep up. And as a result of that, my body felt like it had been beat up.
Mm.
And yoga was a process of coming home to my body and being able to listen to my body, what it needed to be restored, to be renewed, to be rejuvenated. And my body feels better now than it did 20 years ago, which is a miracle, really, I think. And linking breath to movement and feeling all of the work of the pranayama and tuning into my own energy centers, I feel more alive and more vital now than I did at the end of my dance career when I was trying so hard to push.
Mm.
So it was first Labyrinth with dance. And then once dance was done, it sunsetted for me, like quite abruptly. It became the sunrise became yoga. And then what I'm doing now is I'm weaving, and you were so incredible to allow me to bring Labyrinth workshops into the yoga studio. Certainly at Spiral Path
We
was the
love
first
that.
time I'd ever done a yoga practice on the Labyrinth. And certainly at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, they have a weekly class of yoga that practices on the Labyrinth.
Oh, cool.
But it's unusual. It's unusual for people to put the yoga and the Labyrinth together. So that's sort of my quest right now. To see where the yoga and the Labyrinth can speak to each other in some deep and profound symbolic ways.
Oh, totally. And you've already mentioned some of the interpretive ways that, like the chakra theory can overlay onto the labyrinth. And the labyrinth seems like it's a vessel that can hold different layers and different interpretations, and people can kind of relate to it in the way that's the most resonant for them, which is really interesting.
Exactly. It is that open. And the classical labyrinth looks a lot like our brain. It looks a lot like it does. It has just kind of this swirling shape. And what's wonderful about things that you collect is people send them to you. So now, because people know I'm the labyrinth lady, whenever people are traveling like to Iceland or Ireland or Peru, people will send me pictures of labyrinths from all around the world.
Wow.
And it's so wonderful. I was reading some about the Nazca lines in Peru, and they're some of the biggest labyrinths on the planet.
Oh,
They
really?
can best be seen from the hillside. And the ancient people, the Quechua people of Peru, were known to be astrologers and were very in tune with the cosmos, with the solstice and the equinox and the patterns and movement of the stars. But they were also very much interested in the movement of water. So many people say that labyrinths are collectors of water or are built over sites that are water wells.
Hmm.
So people consider the labyrinth to be verdant and uh, life giving and affirming. And so the most life affirming thing we have is water, and we are made of water. So it's a little bit of some believe that the water was there first. And so people built the labyrinth there. Other people say you build the labyrinth and the water comes. And that's very interesting because the Nazca lines are really in an area that's like a desert,
Hmm.
but they've been able to find that there are water residuals under each of the labyrinth patterns.
Wow, that's pretty cool how different, times and places people have created similar symbols, and there's just something very human about it, even though, it can be developed very differently in different cultures, but that's really cool.
The native peoples have one called the man in the maze, even though it is a labyrinth, and they put a man right in the center, and it's seen in often in Navajo and Hopi nations.
Okay.
And it was very much about the journey of life and dying to self and releasing the things that don't serve us so that we can fulfill our purpose and that going into the maze or the labyrinth was a spiritual quest of shedding in order to come back out and be your best and highest self in the world. And I love that too.
That's so cool. I wanted to ask you more. You started to talk about the practice of taking a question with you into the labyrinth, or this kind of reflection or inquiry practice that could be part of it. Like, how is that done? Or what's an example of the kind of question you might ask or how you might approach that?
Thank you so much for asking about that. I've been doing some studying on that because people often tell me after they walk the labyrinth that they have greater clarity on something that has been bothering them or worrying them. I always, and you've seen me do it, I always have a box of tissues at the entrance to the labyrinth, because the labyrinth is, talk about water. The labyrinth is a profound release for many, many people, that they walk in with a heavy heart, either with grief or with a conundrum, something that they haven't been able to solve with their very clever brain. And it's a surrender. It's a release that we walk in and we say, I don't know what to do about this. That's one of the best questions. What shall I do about this? Fill in the blank. And it might be about a particularly challenging relationship. It might be about a crossroads in your life. It might be about something you're trying to decide, does this need to end? Whether that's a job, a career path. And it's often something that we're holding on to very, I got to hold on to this for safety, for security, for protection, for financial security, whatever it may be that we think we need in the material world. And then the labyrinth is like, oh, no. Here's what your heart wants. And the labyrinth really unlocks heart's desire. It really opens up this profound, deep cave of the heart where all of our wisdom and our intuition is already there, and we just have to remember it. And it is gut level intuition. It is third eye level intuition. And we have to trust and release. And often it's not even forming the question specifically. It's, I don't know what to do about this. Help, or guide, or show, reveal, clarify. Those to me are the quote unquote best kind of questions, because you're going in with an open heart and an open mind. I have never been disappointed when I go in that way. I often find answers in the labyrinth that I haven't even asked, or that I didn't even know was on my heart. But I'm like, oh, that's going on. It's because I'm getting out of this processing that my mind wants to do all the time. It wants to sort, it wants to categorize, it wants to prep and plan and, organize. And it's almost like the container and the structure of the labyrinth. It's like looking at a map when you see the boundaries between states and countries. The labyrinth takes that map and wipes all those boundaries away. It's like, no, there are no states here. There are no countries here. There's just the beautiful earth. There's just our experience of this lived experience. And you can flow through that. There are no boundaries, preconceived notions, limitations, what you think you know, none of it. And that's what I love. I was just looking at Sig Longren's book. It's called Labyrinths. There's so many good books that are written about labyrinths.
You'll have to send me a little list to put in the
I can send you a little bibliography
for this. Yeah, that would be good to
he
read
has
too.
He has a 4-part question process that I just loved, and I thought I would share. So he does it as you walk into the labyrinth in the 4-part journey of the 4 quadrants. And the first question is, when did I first become aware of this issue, this problem? So you just sort of riff on, when did this problem, issue, challenge arise for me? And then you go into the second quadrant. what will I have to give up to resolve this? I love that. That shedding, that letting go. What will I have to give up in order for this to be resolved? And then in the third quadrant is, what is the new vision? What
Mm.
needs to change? What needs to change in me for this to be possible? And then in the fourth quadrant, what will it look like if I make this change? And sometimes it's forgiving. Sometimes it's embracing. Sometimes it's surrendering. And I love that it's really that the old has to die for the new to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And the labyrinth is a profound symbol of rebirth, and that we can evolve and be reborn at any stage of our life. We're never too old to learn, to grow, to be our best and highest self. And I think that's what our yoga tradition promises us as well. As long as we're breathing, as long as we're present, that we can continue to change and grow and evolve. And so that's, to me, the
Mm-hmm.
profound lesson of the labyrinth is just come. Just the only decision is to step on.
It's so hopeful, and it's so archetypal, and I think that the symbolism of it and all of the different meanings embedded in it bring out that sort of like, that's why you get answers to questions you didn't know you had, right? It's like this it brings up the unconscious, I think, to be seen and to be made conscious. And it's kind of a powerful container for that because of the history of it and what it contains and the archetype of it, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said earlier, the universality of it, that we all, as human beings, we all have this deep need to make meaning of our journey. We want our
Mhm.
lives to matter. We so much want our lives to matter. And when we step on the labyrinth, we realize that the simplest gesture of loving kindness and generosity, the simplest gesture of being in community and making our lives matter to ourselves, is making our lives matter to each other. And that we're
Yes.
connected in this interdependent web of life that is really symbolized in many mythologies. There are these nets of stars, nets of connection. And I feel that when I'm on the labyrinth, that I'm connected to everybody else who has ever walked a labyrinth or will ever walk a labyrinth. And that the seeking, this making meaning, this interpretation of sacredness is such a profound, radical act.
It's so beautiful. Where the answer to this might be Google it. But where can people find labyrinths to walk? Is there like a great list of labyrinths somewhere, or it I
Oh,
know
yeah.
you can name a few in Southern California that people can find, but
Yeah.
people might be
So,
listening
yeah.
from who knows where, but like how can we find places to do this?
So there is a profound community of people that have dedicated their lives to labyrinth work.
Awesome.
It is like really intense. People are really into it, right? And it appears on the Labyrinth Locator. So there
Okay.
is, yes, you can Google it, Labyrinth Locator, and it'll pop you right up to the Labyrinth Locator. And the Labyrinth Locator is a crowdsourced database, essentially, where people can register their labyrinths, and they can be permanent labyrinths. And labyrinths can be made of earth, pine cones, bamboo,
Oh,
rocks, hedges. They can be certainly sourced from that place where you find a space for a labyrinth. They can also be on canvas, as I described. They can be impermanent. Sometimes they're pop-up labyrinths. Sometimes they exist in church spaces, parks. They exist in people's backyards, and they make them available to others. And all of those can be searched by zip code or by type of labyrinth,
oh,
but it's
yay.
the worldwide labyrinth locator.
That's awesome. And that's, yeah, I'm glad you described the variety of labyrinths because some of them are out in nature, like in a park,
Mhm.
or some of them are indoors inside of a great cathedral, or some of them are like yours, which is a huge canvas piece that has to be rolled up and folded in a certain way to fit in that big container, that little Tupperware thing that we used to keep at the studio. But
Exactly.
you can
Exactly.
take that to any clean floor that's big enough and roll it out and have a labyrinth to practice on. So there's portable ones, and then there's ones that you could go find that are more permanent.
Here in Southern California, Addie knows we have these beautiful gardens. One's called Descanso Gardens and one's called Huntington Gardens. And for years and years, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have labyrinths in these places? Well, the labyrinths that have sprung up in these two places are very simple spirals of rocks. They're just like a single path of rocks going in a spiral.
And
But
Arlington Gardens, isn't that one kind of like that?
Arlington Garden,
Yeah.
that's an outdoor one in Pasadena. So there's all different kinds. And we always say there's no right or wrong way to walk a labyrinth. And there's really no right or wrong way to build a labyrinth. You can have the sacred geometry and all of the particular, measurements and all of that. But the intentionality of walking a sacred path is simply following the path where it leads and then coming back out to where you started. So this universal symbol of a circle that has no beginning and no end. And in our eternal quest for ourself and our soul, we hope that there is no beginning and no end, that we are eternal, that are the spark of our essence. And it's so there's just layers and layers and layers of how people relate to the labyrinth and make the land sacred,
Mm.
honoring First Peoples, acknowledging people that have walked this land before us. There's so many layers that we can do by honoring the land and walking on the land, and even taking off your shoes. I remember when we were doing silent meditation over at the Pasadena Museum of History with
Oh
Addie.
yeah, the
I
curtain
took
house.
off my shoes and I felt the grass and the earth underneath my feet, and that literal connection to the earth and walking on the earth and feeling that profound miracle. Thich Nhat Hanh always said the miracle is not walking on the water, it's walking on the earth
I love
with
that.
with grace and with dignity. And I really believe that this sacred walking on the earth, whether it's a forward step to turn and come back on the same path, whether it's done in a Buddhist walking meditation fashion or in this universal form of the labyrinth walking, that it's all is all sacred work, and it makes such a difference in our own mental and emotional well-being. It certainly has for me.
I love that. I'm glad there's a locator where we can go. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to go look for some labyrinths up in this area in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, they exist.
I
You
bet
have
they
you have a
do.
big you have a big labyrinth community in the
Oh,
Northwest.
cool. And
Yeah.
when they're outdoors, they have like a different energy depending on where they are. Like one in a foresty, environment would feel really different from there was one at this retreat center in Joshua Tree in the desert in California that has a really different feel to it. And so it's,
Oh,
yeah, I think that's a
yeah.
fun
Thank
part.
you
We
for
could do
saying
like
that.
travel and labyrinth seeking.
Oh, it's a thing. So, one of the amazing things about outdoor labyrinths is the moon. And there are people that always walk an outdoor labyrinth under the full moon. So, that's a whole
Ooh,
nother practice because
that
the
sounds
labyrinth is
cool.
related to the phases of the moon. And you can, consecrate your walk towards the fullness of the moon or the possibilities of a new moon, the
Mm.
waxing or the waning. And so, being able to be out under the stars and under the moon is a profound way of walking a labyrinth. I don't get that opportunity very often because the cemeteries aren't open after dark. But
Well, they get a little weird after dark, don't they?
I don't know what would
I
be going on with a
Inside
full moon
LA
walk.
used to have a meditation class at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and Robert taught it.
Oh, oh,
Robert,
really? Yes, of
and
course.
he was on the podcast earlier for people who to know who the Robert is I'm referring to. But I got to fill in for him one time there, and it was kind of cool actually. We did walking meditation out amongst the tombstones, and there's a lot of famous people in that cemetery. So I'm not saying it was the best for my concentration, but it was really interesting.
That is amazing. Well, one thing that I've done recently here in Sierra Madre, which is the town that I live in and where Addie used to live, is they're suggesting a housing development near the monastery, which is very sacred ground near the monastery and the mountain. It's wildlife area. It's areas where we have profound energy of the mountains. And we're suggesting that they build a labyrinth right there on the grounds. And I brought my canvas labyrinth out to the park in Sierra Madre and gave people a chance to walk it. And it was an amazing response. They're like, oh, we'd love to have a labyrinth in our town.
That'd be really cool.
That would be really cool if that might come to pass in the future.
I think it's so cool when there's like a public one that's outside that people can just drop in and access, and it's so informal and so available, and you don't know who else has been walking it. You go in there and it's just got a particularly interesting energy to it, I think, because many people are using it, and it's so accessible.
And it's community. I mean,
exactly.
One of the things that's accessible too is the one in at the neighborhood church in Pasadena. The paths are so wide that you can roll a wheelchair. And there's a whole practice of taking people in wheelchairs. We recently built another labyrinth. Well, Chris Runco, who's a former Disney Imagineer, he painted a labyrinth at All Saints Church outdoors during COVID, and it's wide enough for wheelchairs to navigate and to go back and forth. There are also Braille labyrinths that people can do with their fingers for people that are visually impaired.
Cool.
There's also people that take horses and go through a path of labyrinth with their
equine labyrinth experience.
Yes. Whoa. It's amazing. It is just, it's so amazing that people have thought about different ways to make them accessible and available, and that it should be a practice that everyone can engage in. Finger labyrinths are quite profound. People in hospitals and institutions can use a finger labyrinth to follow the path of the labyrinth with their hand. So there's been a lot of progress on accessibility as well.
I love the creativity and care in that. That's sweet. I wanted to ask you just briefly about Mindful Strategies, which is the name of your business, and what you do outside of teaching yoga classes and labyrinth workshops and things, but because you bring the spirit of this into other domains through your work.
I do.
What is Mindful Strategies?
So when I was trying to develop this concept for my own brand and my own website, I was having conversations with people, and they would say, well, what is it that you do? And I would say, well, I do yoga and I do labyrinth and I do yoga nidra, and I do arts, I do dance, and I work with arts education in schools. And they're like, whoa, that's a lot. Right. and I was
multi-passionate, like we said.
Multi-passionate.
And sometimes people are like, focus, Peggy.
Exactly. That's really a lot. So I started conceiving of my life as sort of like this mandala, which is, of course, another form of a circular, sacred, geometric path. And that, just like the rosette in the center of the labyrinth, or just like the mandala, I could have these different sort of interlocking circles, these Venn diagrams. And at the center of that really is a profound devotion to mindfulness as lifestyle. So that mindfulness is not something I do, that mindfulness is the way that I live no matter what I'm doing. And I don't do that perfectly every day, but that is my quest, is to live mindfully no matter what I do. So what Addie was referring to is I work within K-12 education in the state of California. And I do that through strategic planning, professional development for teachers, and curriculum development, especially around embracing social and emotional learning with the arts. And since COVID, the teachers, the educators have been so open to mindful practices. We used to call them brain breaks for the kids, brain breaks.
Don't
And
break your
now
brain,
they're,
though.
right? They're embodied experiences that get us out of our thinking mind and drop us into our heart. And it is so important now, especially since COVID, for the educators and for the students to have tools and to have resources to be able to drop into mindfulness. Before COVID, mindfulness and yoga were considered sort of like fringe practices in schools. Now they're considered central to healing.
Interesting.
It's been a complete shift.
Shifting.
And I didn't realize that COVID would have such a profound effect. So I bring mindfulness into classrooms, into boardrooms, into administrative meetings. I start every meeting and every Zoom with mindful meditation, which is mind-blowing. Whenever I do a strategic plan, I start with mindful practices. People always come up to me at lunch and say, that mindful thing, that was the best part of the whole day. I'm like, yes,
You mean
yes.
just sitting quietly and breathing felt nice?
Who knew?
Oh my God.
And I always say, close your computer, we'll move into mindfulness.
It just it makes sense that COVID and kids having to do their learning virtually for a long time really highlighted the social and emotional aspects of education, and the social emotional learning is now like even more in people's awareness. So I think it's so cool what you do with bringing mindfulness and movement and the arts together in such a wonderful tapestry to help enhance people's learning experience at school.
Well, and it's such a continuum. We have been talking a long time about trauma-informed practices within schools. And it's sort of a triage where educators need to be holding a container for the students to feel brave and safe and protected and themselves and open to who they are. And then if they need additional supports, we have school counselors, we have school psychologists, we have people to hold that space. And then if they need more support, they refer the students and the families out to other professional services. So what we're really trying to do is to create a foundation around what they call tier 1 supports in this multi-tiered system of support for all students, so that all students feel like they have mental well-being. Sorry.
Your fairies are here.
My fairies are chiming me. And that the next layer is available, and the next layer, but that all students have supports to know they are free to be themselves and they are held. We talked a lot about teaching the whole child.
Yeah.
This is really, in my experience of working inside of K-12 education over these last 20 years, this is the first time where that's actually happening.
That's amazing.
And they're saying not come in and put on a happy face. They're saying come in and sit with, name, and note your feelings. And then you can stay with that feeling if you need to. If your grandmother just died, you're going to be in grief, and you need to stay with that. You don't need to put on the happy face. You need to sit with that feeling, be with it, move through it, release it when you're ready. And that's a huge shift for education.
Oh,
huge.
joke.
I mean, I can't believe the things that I'm seeing, because it was like, sit down, open your book. I don't care how you feel right now. We need to do this math problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how most of us experience.
That's how we were conditioned. It's exciting to think about these kids getting old enough to take over and be our leaders. If they have a different conditioning than our generations had, I have a little bit of hope from that.
So I'm hoping that that's what mindful strategies is, Addie, is that it blurs the line between these different practices, and it is a holistic view of how to live mindfully in all of these different ways, environments, and ways of moving through the world. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I wanted people to know the fullness of what you do, and she's such a skilled group facilitator and strategic planner, and just ask her sometime about her magic purple sticky wall. It's like
it is magic.
If you have a group that cannot talk their way out of a problem, the magic sticky wall. I'm telling you. But
It's
anyway,
the truth. It's absolutely the truth.
was,
I experienced it this week with an arts organization,
we
and
did. Yeah,
it was profound.
when I was on the board of Long Beach Meditation, and we were having trouble with succession planning and like, should we rent a space? Should we try to have our own space? Oh my gosh, it was just like a magical conversation because of the structure that this sticky wall process gives. But anyway,
Another version of a sacred container, Addie. I mean, I
Yeah.
think when you talk about the structure and the container, that's everything, right? That's all of these
See, there's
practices.
a through line for you with the different things that you are doing. There's
Yes.
always a through line.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to share all of this with us and to introduce us to the Labyrinth practice. And we'll put some of those links and resources up on the website with this episode so people can get into this and discover it. But where can people connect further with you if they have questions, or if they're local to you and want to take your class, or, how can they find you?
Thank you. So my website is www.mindfulstrategies.com. I have a contact me on there, and I see those right away, and I always reply back to those right away. My Instagram is Peggy Burt Yoga, and reach out to me through Instagram or on my website. My website has opt-in for my newsletter, and hopefully, if you're here in Southern California, come and take a class. I use the Spiral Path tradition, which is first class free. My classes are held in La Cañada at the Nourishing Spirits Center at St. George Episcopal, and all that information's on my website as well. Would love to connect. Would love to take you on a labyrinth walk. I take people up to the Forest Lawn Labyrinth like all the time. And you're like, I've never walked a labyrinth. I'm like, oh,
let's go.
Come with me. I do that on a very regular basis. So please let me know if you'd like more information or like to connect. Addie, gratitude to our journey together, which is ever spiraling, ever evolving,
ongoing,
giving so much to my life. And you have been such a profound teacher and mentor to me.
Aww,
and I am
likewise.
such a grateful journey companion to you. We're always going to be on this path together.
Yes. And thank you again for taking the time this morning. And I think people will really enjoy learning from you. So much gratitude to you as well for all the twists and turns in our path together.
And let there be more.
There will.
Many thanks.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and/or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.